The radio crackled with static as Sergeant Rachel Martinez pressed herself against the concrete wall, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. 3 months of training, countless hours at the firing range, and endless drills had led to this moment. But nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold in the abandoned factory district of Kandahar province. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her squad leader's voice echoed in her mind from just 2 weeks earlier. Martinez, you're not ready for frontline combat. Stay with communications. Those words had stung more than any physical wound ever could. Now, with enemy fire erupting around them and her entire unit pinned down, Rachel was about to prove that readiness isn't always measured in the ways you'd expect. Staff Sergeant James Thompson had made his position crystal clear from the moment. Private First Class Rachel Martinez joined Bravo Company. At 23, Rachel was one of the youngest soldiers in the unit, and her petite frame and soft-spoken demeanor didn't exactly scream combat ready to the grizzled veteran who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Martinez, you're better suited for support roles, Thompson had announced during their first briefing at Forward Operating Base Wolverine. Communications, logistics, maybe medical assistance, but frontline combat, that's not your strength. Rachel had felt the eyes of her squad mates on her as Thompson's words settled over the briefing room like a heavy blanket. Corporal David Chun, a demolitions expert with biceps the size of tree trunks, had nodded in agreement. Specialist Marcus Williams, their designated marksman, had simply shrugged, already accustomed to Thompson's blunt assessments. But what Thompson didn't know was that Rachel Martinez had grown up in East Los Angeles, where survival meant being tougher than you looked. Her father, a retired Marine, had taught her to shoot before she could properly ride a bike. Her mother, a paramedic, had shown her how to stay calm under pressure when lives hung in the balance. These weren't skills that showed up on military aptitude tests, but they were ingrained in her DNA. The first mission had been a routine patrol through the village of Kalainaw, a supposedly quiet sector where the most dangerous thing they'd encountered in months was a stray dog with a limp. Thompson had assigned Rachel to radio duty, keeping her in the center of the formation while the real soldiers took point and watched the flanks. Wolverine Base, this is Bravo 7, Rachel had reported into her headset, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. We're approaching Checkpoint Alpha, all quiet on the western approach. The response came back immediately. Copy that, Bravo 7. Maintain radio contact every 15 minutes. As they moved through the narrow streets, Rachel found herself studying everything with an intensity that surprised even her. The way shadows fell across doorways, the subtle changes in civilian behavior as they passed, the almost imperceptible shift in the wind that carried sounds from around corners. Her training had taught her to be observant, but this felt different, like every sense was heightened, every detail magnified. Corporal Chun glanced back at her as they rounded a corner. You doing okay back there, Martinez? You look like you're seeing ghosts. Just staying alert, Rachel replied, adjusting her grip on the M4 carbine that Thompson had reluctantly allowed her to carry. Everything seems different today, Chun chuckled. That's just pre-mission jitters. You'll get used to it. But Rachel wasn't experiencing jitters. She was experiencing something else entirely, a heightened awareness that made her skin crawl with anticipation. Something was wrong in Kalainaw, and she could feel it in ways she couldn't explain. The patrol continued without incident, but Rachel's unease grew with each passing hour. When they finally returned to base, Thompson had clapped her on the shoulder with what she assumed was meant to be encouragement. See? Nothing to worry about in communications, he'd said. You did good today, Martinez. Stick to what you're good at. The second mission had been different. Intelligence reports suggested increased insurgent activity in the region, and Thompson had decided to take a more aggressive approach. Instead of routine patrols, they were conducting reconnaissance in force, moving through areas where contact with the enemy was not just possible but likely. Rachel had again been assigned to communications and support, but this time she'd been positioned with Specialist Williams in an overwatch position, while Thompson led the main element through a suspected weapons cache location. "Martinez, keep your eyes on the northern approach," Williams had instructed as he set up his sniper rifle. "If anything moves that doesn't belong, you let me know immediately." Through her binoculars, Rachel had watched Thompson's team advance toward a cluster of abandoned buildings. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty ground, and the silence was broken only by the occasional crackle of radio traffic. Then, she'd seen it, a glint of metal from a rooftop about 400 meters to the north. Just a flash, barely visible, but enough to make her blood run cold. "Williams," she'd whispered urgently. "Northern rooftop, 2 o'clock from the water tower. I think I saw movement." Williams had swung his scope toward the position, scanning for several long seconds before shaking his head. "I don't see anything, Martinez. You sure?" But Rachel had been sure. Every instinct she possessed was screaming that something was wrong. She'd keyed her radio. "Bravo 7 to Bravo 1. Possible enemy movement on northern rooftop. GRID reference 427896. Thompson's voice had come back immediately, tinged with irritation. "Martinez, we don't have time for false alarms. Are you certain of enemy contact?" Rachel had looked through her binoculars again, but the rooftop appeared empty. Doubt crept into her mind. Maybe she'd been seeing things. Maybe the stress of her first real mission was getting to her. "Negative contact confirmed," she'd replied reluctantly, continuing to observe. 10 minutes later, the ambush had erupted. From that exact rooftop, Thompson's team had taken cover just in time, but barely. 3 soldiers had been wounded, including Thompson himself, who'd taken shrapnel to his leg. During the after-action review, Thompson had been surprisingly quiet about Rachel's early warning. But she'd noticed Williams looking at her differently, with something that might have been respect. "You called that ambush before it happened," he'd said quietly as they cleaned their weapons. "How'd you know?" Rachel had shrugged, unsure how to explain the feeling that had gripped her. Just something felt wrong about that rooftop. "Well, whatever it was, it probably saved our lives," Williams had replied. "Thompson won't admit it, but he knows you were right." The third mission had been the turning point. Intelligence had pinpointed a high-value target in a compound outside the village of Spin Boldak. The plan was simple: surround the compound, secure the target, and extract before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Thompson, now walking with a slight limp from his wound, had briefed the squad with his usual no-nonsense approach. "This is a precision operation. Martinez, you'll be running communications from the command post. Chun, you're on breaching charges. Williams, you've got overwatch. Questions?" Rachel had wanted to ask why she was being kept away from the action again, but she'd held her tongue. She was starting to understand that proving herself would take time, and arguing with Thompson wasn't going to speed up the process. The compound had been larger than the aerial photos suggested, with multiple buildings connected by high walls and narrow alleyways. As the squad moved into position, Rachel had established communications with all elements and settled into her role as the nerve center of the operation. "Bravo 1, this is Bravo 7, she'd reported. "All elements in position, ready to execute. On your command." "Copy that, Bravo 7. Begin breach in 30 seconds. As Chun prepared his charges, Rachel had found herself studying the compound through her night vision scope. Something about the layout bothered her, the way the buildings were arranged, the positioning of the windows, the fact that no lights were visible anywhere despite intelligence suggesting the target was present. "All elements, this is Bravo 7. She'd called suddenly. "Something's not right about this compound. It feels like a trap." Thompson's voice had come back sharp and annoyed. "Martinez, this is not the time for hunches. We have solid intelligence and a mission to complete." But Rachel's instincts had been screaming at her. The compound was too quiet, too perfectly arranged for an ambush. She'd keyed her radio again. "Bravo 1. Request permission to suggest an alternative approach vector." "Negative, Bravo 7. Maintain communications protocol and stick to your assigned role." Rachel had watched in growing alarm as Chun placed his charges and the squad prepared to breach. Every fiber of her being was telling her that they were walking into a carefully prepared kill zone, but she was just the communications operator. Her job was to relay messages, not make tactical decisions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The explosion that followed had lit up the night sky like a miniature sun. But instead of the controlled breach they'd planned, Chun's charges had detonated a massive improvised, explosive device that had been wired to the compound's main entrance. In the chaos that followed, with half the squad wounded and Thompson unconscious, Rachel Martinez had been forced to make a choice that would define not just her military career, but her understanding of what it truly meant to be ready for combat. The ringing in Rachel's ears was so loud, she could barely hear her own thoughts. Through the smoke and debris, she could make out the silhouettes of her squad mates scattered across the rocky ground like broken dolls. Chun was motionless near what remained of the compound wall, his demolition kit spread around him in a grotesque arc. Williams was crawling toward cover, dragging his rifle and leaving a dark trail behind him. Thompson lay crumpled against a boulder, his tactical vest torn open and his radio headset hanging uselessly from one ear. Blood trickled from his temple, and his eyes were rolled back, showing only the whites. Rachel's training kicked in with mechanical precision. She grabbed her medical kit while simultaneously keying her radio with her free hand. "Wolverine Base, this is Bravo 7. We have multiple casualties at Objective Rally Point. Request immediate medevac and QRF support." Static filled her earpiece. She tried again, adjusting frequencies. Still nothing. The explosion had either damaged her radio or knocked out the relay tower. Either way, they were on their own. "Williams!" she called out, crawling toward the wounded marksman. "How bad is it?" "Shrapnel in my leg," he gasped, his face pale but alert. "I can still shoot if you can get me propped up somewhere." Rachel quickly assessed his wound. The metal fragment had missed the major arteries, but he was losing blood fast. She applied a pressure bandage and helped him into a defensive position behind a low wall. "Chun's not moving," Williams said grimly, nodding toward their demolition. Expert, Rachel had already seen enough to know that Chun was beyond help. The blast had thrown him directly into the compound wall, and the unnatural angle of his body told her everything she needed to know. But she had to check anyway. She low-crawled across the open ground, her heart hammering against her ribs. Enemy voices were already echoing from inside the compound, and she could hear the distinctive sound of AK-47s being chambered. They had maybe 2 minutes before the trap closed completely. Chun's eyes were open, but unseeing. Rachel checked for a pulse she knew she wouldn't find, then grabbed his ammunition and grenades. Every round was going to count down as she made her way back to Williams. A new sound froze her blood. Vehicle engines, approaching fast from the east. The enemy reinforcements that intelligence had said wouldn't arrive for at least an hour were already here. "Martinez," Williams hissed. "We need to move Thompson. If they take the high ground, we're finished." Rachel looked at their unconscious squad leader, then at the approaching headlights cutting through the darkness. Thompson was dead weight, and they had maybe 30 seconds before the vehicles reached optimal firing positions. The tactical part of her brain, the part that had been trained in dozens of scenarios just like this one, was telling her to establish a defensive perimeter and wait for reinforcements. But her instincts were screaming something else entirely. "Williams, can you cover the eastern approach?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "I've got about 15 rounds left," he replied, checking his magazine. "Maybe 20 minutes of effective fire if I make every shot count." Rachel nodded and began stripping Thompson of his equipment. His M4 was undamaged, and he carried twice as much ammunition as she did. More importantly, he had the squad's only grenade launcher. "What are you doing?" Williams asked. "Something Thompson would never approve of," Rachel replied, slinging the grenade launcher across her back. "I'm going to get us out of here." She dragged Thompson behind the largest boulder she could find, then positioned herself where she could see both the compound and the approaching vehicles. The enemy fighters were already emerging from the buildings, their muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireflies. Rachel had grown up playing paintball in the concrete jungle of East LA, where victory went to whoever could think 3 moves ahead. The abandoned factories and warehouses of her neighborhood had taught her that sometimes the best defense was an offense so unexpected that the enemy couldn't respond in time. The first vehicle, a battered pickup truck with a heavy machine gun, mounted in the bed, rounded the corner 50 meters away. Rachel sighted her grenade launcher and fired in one fluid motion. The 40mm round struck the truck's engine block, and the explosion lit up the night sky. The second vehicle swerved to avoid the burning wreckage, giving Rachel the opening she needed. She sprinted toward the compound, using the smoke and confusion to close the distance before the enemy could reorganize. "Martinez, what the hell are you doing?" Williams shouted over the radio. "Trust me," she replied, sliding into cover behind a low wall just as automatic fire erupted from the compound windows. Above her, Rachel had realized something that Thompson's by-the-book tactics had missed. The compound wasn't just a trap, it was a fortress designed to keep attackers out, not defenders in. The same walls that provided cover for the enemy also created blind spots and limited their fields of fire. She pulled one of Chun's grenades from her belt and counted to 3 before tossing it through a ground floor window. The explosion was followed by screams and the sound of collapsing masonry. 2 more grenades cleared the adjoining rooms. The enemy fighters on the upper floors were now trapped. They could fire down at the courtyard, but they couldn't hit targets directly below them without exposing themselves to return fire. Rachel had effectively turned their advantage into a liability. "Williams, I need you to put suppressing fire on the second-floor windows," she called into her radio. "I'm going to clear the ground floor." "With what?" "You're 1 person against a dozen fighters." "Just trust me," Rachel repeated. Chambering a fresh round in her grenade launcher, she moved through the compound like a ghost, using shadows and smoke to mask her movements. Her small size, which Thompson had seen as a weakness, now became her greatest asset. She could move through spaces that would trap a larger soldier, and her light footsteps were nearly silent on the debris-covered floors. The first fighter she encountered was reloading his weapon in a doorway. Rachel's training took over, and her M4 barked twice. The man dropped without a sound. Room by room, she systematically cleared the ground floor. Some of the enemy fighters tried to come downstairs to engage her, but they were silhouetted against the lighter walls above, making them easy targets. Others tried to escape through windows, only to run into Williams' accurate fire from his overwatch position. Within 10 minutes, the compound was silent except for the crackling of flames from the destroyed vehicles outside. Rachel had neutralized 12 enemy fighters without losing a single member of her squad. "Bravo 7, this is Wolverine Base," crackled her radio, which had mysteriously started working again. "We show multiple explosions at your location. What's your status?" Rachel keyed her handset, suddenly aware that she was shaking from head to toe. "Wolverine Base, this is Bravo 7. Objective secured. We have 1 KIA and multiple wounded. Request immediate medevac." "Copy that, Bravo 7. Birds are already in the air. Outstanding work. As she made her way back to Williams and the unconscious Thompson, Rachel couldn't help but think about what her squad leader was going to say when he woke up. She had violated every protocol in the book, acted far beyond her assigned role, and made tactical decisions that should have been above her pay grade. But she had also saved their lives and completed a mission that conventional tactics would have turned into a disaster. Maybe being ready for combat wasn't about following orders. Maybe it was about knowing when to break them. The medevac helicopters arrived just as the sun began to peek over the eastern mountains, their rotors beating against the dawn sky like mechanical thunder. Rachel watched from her position beside Thompson as the medical team worked to stabilize their wounded squad leader, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline that had carried her through the night. "He's got a severe concussion and possible internal bleeding," the flight medic shouted over the rotor noise. "We need to get him to the field hospital immediately." As they loaded Thompson onto the stretcher, his eyes fluttered open for a moment. He looked directly at Rachel, confusion clouding his features as he tried to process what had happened. His mouth moved, but no sound came out before he lost consciousness again. Williams was conscious but groggy as they helped him into the helicopter. "Martinez," he called out weakly. "That was the most insane thing I've ever seen anyone do." "And it worked," Rachel nodded, unsure how to respond. The reality of what had occurred was still settling in. In the space of 4 hours, she had gone from being the squad's communication specialist to single-handedly neutralizing an entire enemy stronghold. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the battalion commander, arrived with the Quick Reaction Force 20 minutes after the medevacs departed. Rachel had never spoken directly to Hayes before, but she recognized the woman's reputation. Hayes was known for her tactical brilliance and her complete intolerance for soldiers who couldn't perform under pressure. "Private Martinez," Hayes said, approaching with her aide and the QRF team leader. "I want you to walk me through exactly what happened here." Rachel straightened, suddenly aware that she was covered in dust, cordite residue, and blood that wasn't her own. "Yes, ma'am." At approximately 0200 hours, Corporal Chun detonated the breaching charge on the compound's main entrance. The explosion was larger than expected and triggered a secondary IED that had been placed by the enemy. Hayes nodded, making notes on a tablet. "Continue." Staff Sergeant Thompson was knocked unconscious by the blast. Corporal Chun was killed instantly, and Specialist Williams sustained shrapnel wounds to his leg. Enemy fighters began emerging from the compound buildings, and vehicle-mounted reinforcements approached from the east. And then Rachel hesitated. This was the moment where she would have to explain how she had abandoned her assigned role and taken command of the situation. "I assessed that our defensive position was untenable, ma'am. The enemy had us in a crossfire, and we couldn't evacuate." Staff Sergeant Thompson, without exposing ourselves to direct fire from the compound. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "So you decided to assault a fortified position single-handedly?" "I realized that the compound's defensive advantages could be turned against the enemy if approached from an unexpected vector," Rachel replied carefully. "The same walls that protected them also limited their fields of fire and created blind spots. Show me." For the next hour, Rachel walked Hayes through the compound, explaining her tactical reasoning at each decision point. She showed how she had used the burning vehicles as concealment, how she had cleared each room systematically, and how she had coordinated with Williams to prevent enemy fighters from escaping. Hayes listened without comment, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting that Rachel demonstrate a particular movement. When they reached the upper floors of the compound, where the bodies of enemy fighters lay scattered among overturned furniture and bullet-riddled walls, Hayes finally spoke. "Martinez, according to your service record, you completed basic training just 8 months ago. You've been in country for less than 3 months. How does a soldier with your level of experience execute a complex urban assault operation with this degree of precision?" Rachel had been dreading this question. Ma'am, I grew up in East Los Angeles, the neighborhood I'm from. It taught me to think differently about spaces and movement. And my father is a retired Marine who taught me to shoot and think tactically from a young age. And you've never received formal close-quarters combat training? No, ma'am. Staff Sergeant Thompson felt that my skills were better suited for communications and support roles. Hayes made another note on her tablet. What Thompson felt and what you're capable of appear to be two very different things. 3 days later, Rachel was summoned to the battalion headquarters. She expected to face disciplinary action for exceeding her authority and operating outside her assigned role. Instead, she found herself standing before Hayes and a panel of senior officers she didn't recognize. Martinez, you're being recommended for the Bronze Star with Valor, Hayes announced without preamble. Your actions during the engagement at Spin Bolduc demonstrated exceptional courage under fire and tactical brilliance that saved the lives of your entire squad. Rachel felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Ma'am, I was just doing my job. No. Martinez, you were doing Thompson's job, Williams' job, and Chun's job all at once. And you did them better than any of us expected. One of the unfamiliar officers, a colonel with Special Forces tabs, leaned forward. Martinez, I'm Colonel Robert Pierce from the 5th Special Forces Group. We've been following your situation with interest. Rachel's confusion must have shown on her face because Hayes explained. Colonel Pierce's unit specializes in unconventional warfare and direct action missions. They're always looking for soldiers who can think outside the box. Your performance at Spin Bolduc suggests you have the kind of instincts and adaptability we look for in our operators. Pierce continued. If you're interested, we'd like to offer you a chance to try out for our selection program. Rachel's mind raced. Special Forces was the elite of the elite, the kind of unit that soldiers spent years preparing to even attempt to join. Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for that level of responsibility. Pierce smiled. Martinez, you just proved that qualifications aren't always about what's written in a manual. Sometimes they're about what you do when everything goes wrong and everyone else is counting on you. What about my current assignment? Staff Sergeant Thompson is going to be in recovery for at least 2 months, Hayes interjected. When he returns, Bravo Company will be rotating back to the States. This would be an opportunity for you to continue serving where your skills can be put to their best use. Rachel thought about Thompson's words from just a few weeks earlier. Martinez, you're not ready for frontline combat. She thought about Chun's dismissive attitude and Williams' initial skepticism. Most of all, she thought about the moment when she had looked at the compound and realized that sometimes the best way to solve a problem wasn't to follow the standard playbook. I'd like to accept the opportunity, sir, she said. Pierce nodded approvingly. Selection starts in 6 weeks. I'll have your orders cut and forwarded to your unit. Fair warning, Martinez, what you did at Spin Bolduc was impressive, but it's going to look like a walk in the park compared to what we're going to put you through. As Rachel left the headquarters building, she encountered Williams, who was hobbling around on crutches while he waited for his medical transport back to Germany. Hey Martinez, he called out. I heard about your new assignment. Special Forces, huh? Word travels fast, Rachel replied. In a unit this size, everything travels fast. Williams shifted his weight on his crutches. You know, I've been thinking about what happened out there. Thompson always said you weren't ready for combat, but I think he had it backwards. What do you mean? I think combat was ready for you. You just needed the right situation to prove it. Williams extended his hand. Whatever happens next, it's been an honor serving with you. As Rachel shook his hand, she realized that Williams was right. She hadn't changed during that firefight at Spin Bolduc. She had simply discovered capabilities that had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The doubts that had plagued her since joining the unit were finally beginning to fade. She wasn't the soldier Thompson had tried to make her into, but she was exactly the soldier the Army needed her to be. 6 weeks later, Rachel found herself standing in the pre-dawn darkness of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, surrounded by 47 other soldiers who had been selected for Special Forces assessment and selection. The men around her were all seasoned veterans with multiple deployments, airborne wings, and the kind of confidence that came from years of proven performance. She was the only woman in the group. "Candidates, welcome to the worst 3 weeks of your military careers," announced Master Sergeant Kevin O'Brien, the selection cadre's senior instructor. His voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades separating the capable from the exceptional. "By the time we're finished with you, 35 of you will have quit, then dropped, or wished you had never been born." Rachel shifted her weight, feeling the eyes of her fellow candidates sizing her up. She had spent the past 6 weeks preparing physically and mentally for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of being surrounded by men who clearly questioned whether she belonged there. "The soldier to your left and right has already decided you're going to fail," O'Brien continued. "Your job is to prove them wrong while simultaneously proving that you deserve to wear the hueva same uniform they do. Some of you will discover that you're not as tough as you thought you were. Others will surprise yourselves." The first phase was designed to break down mental barriers through physical exhaustion. 18-hour days filled with ruck marchers, obstacle courses, and sleep deprivation that pushed every candidate to their absolute limits. Rachel quickly learned that her smaller frame, which had been an advantage in urban combat, was now a liability when carrying the same weight as men who outweighed her by 50 pounds. But she also learned something else. While her male counterparts were focused on outperforming each other, she was focused on the mission. When Candidate Johnson, a former Ranger, collapsed during a 20-mile ruck march, Rachel didn't hesitate to redistribute some of his gear among the team. When Candidate Rodriguez struggled with a technical rope climb, she spent her rest period teaching him the technique her father had shown her years earlier. "Martinez, what the hell are you doing?" demanded Candidate Phillips, a former Marine who had made his skepticism about women in Special Forces clear from day one. "This isn't a team-building exercise. We're competing against each other." "No," Rachel replied, adjusting Rodriguez's rope positioning. "We're being evaluated on our ability to work as a team under pressure. Individual performance doesn't mean anything if the team fails." Phillips scoffed, but Rachel noticed that O'Brien was watching the exchange with interest. The second phase introduced more complex scenarios, small unit tactics, navigation under stress, and problem-solving exercises that required not just physical endurance, but mental agility. Rachel found herself naturally gravitating toward leadership roles, not because she sought them out, but because other candidates began looking to her for solutions. During a particularly challenging exercise involving a simulated hostage rescue, Rachel's team found themselves pinned down by instructors playing enemy forces. The scenario was designed to test their ability to adapt when the original plan failed, and most teams had already attempted the direct assault approach with predictable results. "We need to think about this differently," Rachel told her team. During a brief lull in the simulated gunfire, "They're expecting us to come through the front door, because that's what every team before us has tried. What are you suggesting?" asked Candidate Thompson, no relation to her former squad leader. Rachel studied the mock compound, noting the same kind of architectural details that had saved her life at Spin Bolduc. The drainage system. "These buildings are old, and they're all connected underground. If we can access the storm drains, we can come up inside their perimeter." "That's insane," Phillips protested. "Those drains are barely wide enough for a person to crawl through." "Which is exactly why they won't expect it," Rachel replied. "Thompson, you and Rodriguez create a distraction at the front entrance. Phillips, you and Johnson set up overwatch positions. I'll take the drainage route and try to get behind them." The plan worked flawlessly, while her teammates kept the instructor aggressors focused on the obvious approach routes. Rachel crawled through 200 meters of muddy drainage pipes and emerged inside the compound's courtyard. The simulated hostages were secured within minutes, and the exercise was declared a success. That evening, O'Brien pulled Rachel aside. "Martinez, I've been watching your performance throughout this selection process. You're not the strongest candidate, and you're not the fastest. But you consistently demonstrate something that's more important than either of those qualities." "What's that, Master Sergeant?" "You see solutions where others see problems. You build teams where others compete. And you lead from the front when leadership is needed." O'Brien paused, studying her face. "But I need to ask you something directly. Are you prepared for the reality of what Special Forces operators do? This isn't about proving that women can compete with men. This is about your ability to function in the most dangerous and demanding environments on Earth." Rachel had expected this question, but it still caught her off guard. "Master Sergeant, I didn't come here to prove anything about women in military. I came here because I discovered something about myself in Afghanistan that I never knew existed. I function better under pressure than I do in normal circumstances. I see things that others miss, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish the mission." O'Brien nodded slowly. "That's the right answer. But you need to understand that if you make it through selection, you'll be assigned to a team where you'll be the only woman. Every mistake you make will be magnified. Every success will be questioned. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" "I've been dealing with that level of scrutiny since the day I enlisted," Rachel replied. "The difference is that now I know I can handle it." The final phase of selection was conducted in the mountains of North Carolina, where candidates were pushed to their absolute breaking point through a series of increasingly difficult scenarios. Sleep deprivation, hunger, and physical exhaustion were combined with complex problem-solving exercises that tested not just individual capabilities, but the ability to function as part of a team. Rachel found herself leading more often than not because she was assigned leadership roles, but because her teammates naturally deferred to her judgment. When candidate Williams became hypothermic during a night navigation exercise, she organized the team's response. When Phillips suffered a severe ankle injury during a rope traverse, she adapted the team's route to ensure he could continue. "You?" "No," Thompson said during one of their few rest periods. "I was pretty skeptical when I first saw you here. Nothing personal, just wasn't sure if the standards were being lowered or if you were really qualified." "And now?" Rachel asked. "Now, I'm hoping I get assigned to your team when we graduate," he replied. "You've got something that the instructors can't teach. You see the big picture while the rest of us are focused on our individual performance." On the final day of selection, O'Brien assembled the remaining candidates. Of the original 48, only 12 remained. Rachel was one of them. "Congratulations," O'Brien announced. "You've successfully completed Special Forces assessment and selection. You'll now proceed to the Special Forces qualification course, where you'll spend the next year learning the skills you'll need to become operational." As the candidates shook hands and exchanged contact information, Rachel felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had not only survived the selection process, but had excelled in ways that surprised even her. But more importantly, she had finally found her place in the military. She wasn't trying to fit into someone else's definition of what a soldier should be. She was creating her own definition, one mission at a time. 2 years after that night in Spin Boldak, Staff Sergeant Rachel Martinez found herself crouched in the dense jungle of Colombia, her face painted with camouflage and her M4 carbine equipped with night vision optics. The mission was classified at the highest levels, but the objective was clear: locate and extract a kidnapped American diplomat before his captors could move him across the border into Venezuela. Her team consisted of 5 other Special Forces operators, all men who had initially questioned her presence, but had long since accepted her as their equal. Sergeant First Class David Park, their medic, had served with her through 3 deployments. Staff Sergeant Michael Santos, their communications specialist, had requested to be assigned to her team after hearing about her reputation for unconventional tactics. "Martinez, what's your read on the compound?" whispered Captain James Morrison, their team leader, over the radio. Rachel studied the cluster of buildings through her scope, noting the patterns of guard movement and the positioning of defensive structures. After 2 years of specialized training and operational experience, she could read a tactical situation like others read a book. "I count 12 guards on a rotating patrol schedule," she reported quietly. "They're expecting an approach from the river to the south, which is why they've concentrated their defenses in that direction. But there's a blind spot on the northern slope where the jungle canopy provides natural concealment." "Sounds like another one of your creative solutions," Morrison replied with what Rachel had learned to recognize as respect rather than skepticism. The plan they developed was classic. Rachel Martinez used the enemy's assumptions against them while exploiting weaknesses that conventional tactics would have missed. While the bulk of the team created a diversion near the river, Rachel and Park would infiltrate through the northern approach and locate the hostage. "Remember," Morrison said as they prepared to move out, "the diplomat has been held for 6 days. He's likely to be disoriented and possibly injured. We need to be prepared for anything." Rachel nodded, checking her equipment one final time. Her kit now included specialized gear that reflected her role as the team's primary reconnaissance and infiltration specialist. Lockpicks, electronic surveillance devices, and climbing equipment that would allow her to access areas that larger operators couldn't reach. The infiltration went exactly as planned. Rachel's smaller frame allowed her to move through the jungle undergrowth without disturbing the vegetation, while her enhanced hearing, developed through years of urban combat experience, helped her avoid patrol routes that the guards themselves weren't fully aware of. "I've got eyes on the target building," she whispered into her radio as she reached the perimeter. "Single guard at the front entrance, but I can see a window access point on the 2nd floor." "Copy that," Morrison replied. "Park, stay with Martinez and provide backup. We'll begin the diversion in 60 seconds. Rachel scaled the exterior wall with the same fluid movements that had carried her through countless training exercises. The window was secured with a simple latch that yielded to her lockpicks within seconds. She slipped inside, her weapon ready, and found herself in a narrow hallway lined with closed doors. The building was older than the intelligence reports had suggested, with thick walls that muffled sound and irregular floor plans that created natural hiding spots. Rachel moved through the structure systematically, checking each room while maintaining constant awareness of her surroundings. She found the diplomat in the 3rd room. She checked. Ambassador Robert Kellerman was bound to a chair, his face bruised and swollen, but his eyes were alert. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment, confusion clouded his features. "I'm Staff Sergeant Martinez, United States Army Special Forces," she whispered, cutting his restraints with a tactical knife. "We're here to get you out." "There are more guards than you think," Kellerman whispered urgently. "They rotate through this building every 20 minutes. The next shift change is in about 5 minutes. Rachel's mind raced. The diversion team would keep the guards occupied for another 10 minutes at most. But if there were additional security measures they hadn't accounted for, the timeline became much more compressed. "Can you move?" she asked, helping the diplomat to his feet. "I think so," he replied, wincing as he put weight on his left leg. "They worked me over pretty good, but nothing's broken." Rachel keyed her radio. "Park, we've got the package, but we may have additional hostiles inbound. What's your status?" "I'm in position at the base of the building," Park replied. "But I can hear voices approaching from the east. Sounds like at least 4 individuals." The sound of boots on wooden stairs confirmed Rachel's worst fears. The Guard shift change was happening ahead of schedule, and they were about to be trapped on the second floor with no easy escape route. "Ambassador, I need you to trust me completely," Rachel said, moving to the window she had entered through. "We're going to have to improvise our way out of this." She quickly rigged a rappelling line using equipment from her kit, securing it to the window frame. The drop was about 15 feet to the ground, manageable under normal circumstances but potentially dangerous for an injured civilian. "Martinez, you've got multiple hostiles entering the building," Park reported. "I count at least 6 armed individuals moving to your location." Rachel could hear voices in the hallway outside, getting closer. She helped Kellerman to the window and quickly explained the rappelling procedure. "I've never done anything like this before," he admitted, fear evident in his voice. "I'll control the descent," Rachel replied. "Just hold on and trust me." The rappel went smoothly until they were about halfway down. A guard rounded the corner of the building just as Rachel and Kellerman reached the ground. The man's shout of alarm was cut short by Park's suppressed rifle, but the damage was done. Their position was compromised. "All teams, this is Martinez," she called over the radio while helping Kellerman toward the tree line. "The package is secure, but we're blown away. Request immediate extraction." "Copy that," Morrison replied. "The extraction point is 500 meters north of your position. We'll cover your movement." What followed was a running firefight through dense jungle terrain, with Rachel and Park alternating between carrying the injured diplomat and providing covering fire. Rachel's training had prepared her for this kind of scenario, but the reality was far more chaotic than any simulation. "How much further?" Kellerman gasped as they paused behind a fallen log. 300 meters, Rachel replied, checking her ammunition. "But we're going to have to move fast. They're trying to cut us off from the extraction point." She keyed her radio again. "Morrison, we need a distraction at grid reference 4728. Heavy concentration of hostiles attempting to flank our position." "Roger that. Stand by for fireworks." Explosion that followed lit up the jungle canopy like daylight. Morrison's team had used their remaining demolition charges to create a secondary diversion, giving Rachel and Park the opening they needed to reach the extraction point. The helicopter ride back to base was conducted in relative silence, with Kellerman receiving medical attention while Rachel processed what had just occurred. Another successful mission, another situation where unconventional thinking had made the difference between success and failure. "Martinez," Morrison said as they approached the landing zone, "I've got some news for you. Command has approved your promotion to Sergeant, First Class. There's also talk of you being considered for the Special Forces Advanced Urban Combat Course." Rachel nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She was thinking about Staff Sergeant Thompson, who had finally returned to duty and was now serving as an instructor at the Army's Urban Warfare School. He had sent her a message after learning about her assignment to Special Forces. "Martinez, I was wrong about you being ready for combat. You weren't ready for combat. Combat was ready for you." She was also thinking about the young soldiers who would follow in her footsteps, women who would face the same doubts and skepticism that she had overcome. Her success hadn't just proven her own capabilities. It had opened doors for others. As the helicopter touched down, Rachel realized that her journey from underestimated communications specialist to Special Forces operator wasn't just about personal achievement. It was about redefining what it meant to be ready for anything the military could throw at you. The girl who had been told she wasn't ready for combat had become the soldier that others turned to when conventional approaches failed. And that, she thought, was exactly where she belonged. 5 years after that fateful night in Afghanistan, Master Sergeant Rachel Martinez stood before a classroom of 24 aspiring Special Forces candidates at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School. The students before her represented The best of the best seasoned soldiers who had already proven themselves in conventional units and were now seeking to join the elite ranks of special operations. Among them sat 3 women, a sight that would have been unthinkable when Rachel first entered the military. The integration of women into special forces roles had been gradual and often contentious, but Rachel's operational record had helped pave the way for others to follow. Today we're going to discuss adaptive leadership in high-stress environments. Rachel began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned her position through blood, sweat, and countless successful missions. Can anyone tell me what the most dangerous assumption is that a leader can make in combat? A hand shot up from the middle of the classroom. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Clark, one of the female candidates, had been watching Rachel with obvious admiration. Throughout the course, "That the original plan will work, Master Sergeant." "Close, but not quite," Rachel replied. "The most dangerous assumption is that you know what you're capable of before you're tested. Every one of you has preconceived notions about your own limitations. My job is to help you discover that most of those limitations exist only in your mind." She clicked to the next slide in her presentation, which showed a tactical map of the compound at Spin Boldak. "This is where I learned that lesson. I was a 23-year-old communications specialist who had been told repeatedly that I wasn't ready for frontline combat. My squad leader had assigned me to stay back with the radio while the real soldiers handled the dangerous work." The room was silent as Rachel recounted the events of that night, but she told the story differently than she had countless times before. Instead of focusing on the tactical details, she emphasized the mental shift that had occurred when she realized that conventional thinking wasn't going to save her squad. "The moment I stopped trying to be the soldier my leadership expected me to be and started being the soldier the situation required, everything changed. I didn't suddenly become stronger or faster or more skilled. I became more myself." After the class, Rachel found herself walking across the base toward the administrative building where she had a meeting with Colonel Pierce, who was now the commanding officer of the Special Warfare School. The same man who had offered her chance at Special Forces selection was now responsible for training the next generation of operators. "Martinez, come in," Pierce called as she knocked on his office door. "I wanted to discuss your next assignment." Rachel took a seat across from his desk, noting the various commendations and photographs that decorated the walls. One photo showed Pierce with her old squad, taken during a visit to Walter Reed Medical Center, where Staff Sergeant Thompson had been recovering from his injuries. "I've been approached by the Pentagon about establishing a new training program," Pierce continued. "They want to create a specialized course focused on urban combat and unconventional tactics. Given your background and your success as an instructor, they've requested that you develop and lead the curriculum." Rachel felt a familiar surge of nervous excitement. "What kind of timeline are we looking at, sir?" "The program would launch in 6 months. You'd have a team of 12 instructors and access to the most advanced training facilities in the military. More importantly, you'd have the authority to design the course from the ground up, based on real-world operational experience rather than theoretical doctrine." This was the kind of opportunity that Rachel had dreamed of but never expected to receive. The chance to influence how the military trained its soldiers for the kind of complex, rapidly evolving combat situations that defined modern warfare. "There's one more thing," Pierce added. "The program would be open to all branches of the military, and it would be one of the first advanced combat courses designed from the beginning to be fully integrated. No separate standards, no modified requirements. Everyone who enters would be held to the same standards and expected to perform at the same level." Rachel nodded, understanding the significance of what Pierce was describing. "When do you need?" "An answer, sir. Take your time to think about it. This would be a significant career move, and it would put you in a very visible position. Not everyone is going to be happy about a woman leading a program like this." As Rachel left Pierce's office, she found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared young soldier who had been told she wasn't ready for combat had become someone who was now being asked to define what combat readiness meant for the entire military. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Master Sergeant Martinez, this is Captain David Williams. I heard you're teaching at the Special Warfare School now. I wanted to thank you for saving my life in Afghanistan and let you know that I'm finally back on active duty. Full recovery, and I'm now commanding a reconnaissance company. Hope we can serve together again someday. Rachel smiled, remembering the wounded marksman who had been one of the first to recognize her potential. Williams had spent 2 years in recovery and rehabilitation, but he had refused to accept a medical discharge and had fought his way back to full-duty status. Her phone rang almost immediately. Martinez speaking. Rachel, it's Williams. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to ask you something. Of course not. It's good to hear from you. I've got a young soldier in my unit who reminds me a lot of you when you were starting out. She's incredibly capable, but she's facing some of the same challenges you did. I was wondering if you might be willing to mentor her. Rachel found herself thinking about the 3 women in her current class, all of whom were struggling with the same doubts and external skepticism that had once plagued her. Tell me about her. Private First Class Sarah Chun, no relation to our old demolitions guy. She's smart, tough, and has incredible instincts, but her leadership keeps trying to pigeonhole her into support roles. Sound familiar? Very familiar. Have her give me a call, and I'll see what I can do. After hanging up, Rachel realized that this was what her career had really been about. Not just proving that she could succeed in roles that others thought she couldn't handle, but creating opportunities for others to do the same. That evening, Rachel drove to Arlington National Cemetery, where she had made a habit of visiting David Chun's grave whenever she was in the Washington area. The cemetery was quiet in the fading light, and she found herself alone at the simple headstone that marked her former teammate's final resting place. "Hey, Chun," she said quietly, placing a small American flag beside the gravestone. "I know you'd probably make some joke about me talking to a dead guy, but I figured you'd want to know how things turned out." She told him about the promotion, about the teaching assignment, about the opportunity to develop the new training program. She talked about Williams' recovery and Thompson's new position as an instructor. She even mentioned the 3 women in her class who were following in her footsteps. "You know what's funny?" she continued. "I used to think that Night in Spin Bolduc was about me proving myself to Thompson and the rest of the squad. But I realized recently that it was really about me proving something to myself. That I could be the kind of soldier who steps up when it matters, regardless of what anyone else thinks I'm capable of." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby oak trees, and Rachel felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. She had carried guilt about Chun's death, wondering if she could have done something differently to save him. But she had finally come to understand that his sacrifice had meaning because of what she had done with the life he had helped preserve. 3 weeks later, Rachel stood in the Pentagon briefing room, presenting her proposal for the new urban combat training program to a panel of generals and senior Defense Department officials. The presentation was the culmination of months of preparation, drawing on every lesson she had learned from her years in special operations. "The modern battlefield is increasingly complex and unpredictable," she began. "Our soldiers need to be prepared for scenarios that don't exist in any manual, situations where success depends on adaptability, creativity, and the ability to lead under extreme pressure." She outlined a training curriculum that emphasized real-world problem-solving over rote memorization, leadership development over individual performance, and the kind of tactical flexibility that had saved her squad in Afghanistan. The program would be intensive, demanding, and designed to push students beyond their perceived limitations. But most importantly, it would be based on the principle that readiness for combat isn't determined by physical characteristics or background. It's determined by the ability to think clearly under pressure and make decisions that save lives. General Patricia Hayes, now the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, leaned forward in her chair. Master Sergeant Martinez, based on your experience, what percentage of students do you expect would successfully complete this program? Rachel had anticipated this question. Ma'am, I believe that the success rate would be similar to other advanced military courses, approximately 60%. But I also believe that the students who complete the program would be fundamentally different soldiers than when they started. They would have discovered capabilities they never knew they possessed. The questions that followed were thorough and challenging, but Rachel found herself answering with the same confidence that had carried her through every obstacle in her career. She wasn't just proposing a training program. She was advocating for a fundamental shift in how the military thought about preparing soldiers for combat. 2 hours later, the panel voted unanimously to approve the program. Rachel Martinez would become the first woman to design and lead a major combat training curriculum for the United States military. As she walked out of the Pentagon, Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from Pierce. "Congratulations, Director Martinez. I always knew you were ready for this." Rachel smiled, thinking about how far she had come from that frightened young soldier who had been told she wasn't ready for combat. The truth was, she hadn't been ready then. But she had been willing to learn, to adapt, and to become the soldier that the situation required. Now, as she prepared to shape the next generation of military leaders, Rachel realized that readiness wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And she was just getting started. The girl who had been told she wasn't ready for combat had become the woman who would define what readiness meant for thousands of soldiers who would follow in her footsteps. And in doing so, she had proven that the most important battles aren't always fought with weapons. Sometimes, they're fought with the determination to exceed every expectation placed upon you. 6 months after the Pentagon approval, Rachel found herself standing in a state-of-the-art training facility at Fort Benning, Georgia. The Urban Combat Leadership Academy was unlike anything the military had seen before. Instead of sterile classrooms and predictable obstacle courses, the facility featured realistic urban environments that could be reconfigured for different scenarios. Director Martinez called out Lieutenant Colonel Angela Foster, her newly assigned deputy director. Foster was a former military police officer who had served 3 tours in Iraq and brought invaluable experience in urban warfare tactics. The first class of students arrives tomorrow. 64 candidates from all branches of service. Rachel surveyed the training complex with satisfaction. Mock city blocks complete with multi-story buildings, underground tunnel systems, and even a simulated subway station. This was where soldiers would learn to think beyond conventional tactics, to adapt and overcome in environments that defied traditional military doctrine. "Any last-minute concerns?" Foster asked. "Just one," Rachel replied. "I keep thinking about something my old squad leader used to say. He believed that soldiers fell into predictable categories: the strong, the smart, the fast, the tough. But I've learned that the most dangerous enemies are the ones who don't fit into any category at all." The first day of classes began with an exercise that Rachel had designed personally. 64 students were divided into 8-person teams and given a scenario that seemed straightforward: rescue a hostage from a building while neutralizing hostile forces. Standard urban warfare doctrine provided clear protocols for such situations. Every team failed. The building was rigged with sensors that detected CONVENTIONAL approach routes. The hostage was actually a trained actor who would provide false information if questioned incorrectly. The enemy forces were instructed to adapt their tactics based on how the students responded, creating a dynamic threat that couldn't be defeated through memorized procedures. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rachel announced to the frustrated students after the exercise concluded, You've just experienced what I call the adaptability gap. You've been trained to execute perfect solutions to predictable problems, but real combat doesn't offer predictable problems. She gestured toward the training facility around them. Over the next 12 weeks, you're going to learn to think like your enemies think, to see opportunities where others see obstacles, and to lead when leadership seems impossible. Some of you will discover capabilities you never knew you possessed. Others will realize that your greatest strength isn't what you thought it was. Among the students, Rachel noticed several who reminded her of her younger self. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, a logistics officer who had volunteered for combat training despite being told she lacked the necessary warrior mentality. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, an intelligence analyst who had spent years behind a desk, but whose tactical insights during the first exercise had impressed even the instructors. But it was private. First Class Sarah Chun, the soldier that Williams had recommended who caught Rachel's attention most. During the failed hostage rescue, Chun had been the only student to question the scenario itself, pointing out inconsistencies that suggested the situation was more complex than it appeared. Chun, stay after class, Rachel called as the students prepared to leave for the day. Yes, ma'am, Chun replied, approaching with the nervous energy that Rachel remembered from her own early days in the military. I understand you know Captain Williams from the 82nd Airborne. Yes, ma'am. He mentioned that you two served together in Afghanistan. He said you might be willing to provide some mentorship. Rachel studied the young soldier's face, seeing familiar signs of someone who had been underestimated and was struggling to prove herself. Tell me about your experience in your current unit. It's been challenging, ma'am. My platoon sergeant keeps assigning me to administrative duties, even though I scored in the top 10% on all my combat assessments. When I ask for more responsibility, he tells me I need to prove myself first. And how does that make you feel? Chun's jaw tightened. Frustrated, ma'am. I joined the army to serve my country, not to file paperwork while other soldiers do the real work. Rachel nodded, remembering her own struggles with Staff Sergeant Thompson's limited expectations. Sarah, can I give you some advice that I wish someone had given me when I was your age? Yes, ma'am. Stop trying to prove yourself to people who have already decided what you're capable of. Instead, focus on proving to yourself that their limitations don't define your potential. The moment you stop seeking their approval and start seeking your own excellence, everything changes. Over the following weeks, Rachel watched Chun and the other students navigate increasingly complex scenarios. The training program pushed them beyond their comfort zones, forcing them to confront not just tactical challenges but psychological barriers that had been limiting their effectiveness. The breakthrough came during the 6th week of training. The students were presented with a scenario that Rachel had based on her own experience in Colombia, a hostage rescue in a jungle compound with multiple buildings and unknown numbers of enemy forces. Chun's team approached the problem differently than any of the previous groups. Instead of focusing on the direct assault options, they spent time analyzing the enemy's likely mindset and motivations. They identified weaknesses in the compound's design that could be exploited, and they developed a plan that used deception and misdirection rather than overwhelming force. Outstanding work, Rachel told Chun after the exercise. You didn't just solve the tactical problem, you redefined it. That's the kind of thinking that saves lives in real combat. As the weeks progressed, Rachel found herself developing a reputation throughout the military education system. Officers from other training commands began visiting the Urban Combat Leadership Academy to observe her methods. Defense contractors sought her input on new equipment designs. Military academies requested her expertise in updating their curricula. But the moment that truly validated her approach came during the final exercise of the first class. The students were presented with a complex urban scenario that combined elements from all their previous training: hostage rescue, enemy infiltration, civilian protection, and infrastructure defense. The scenario was designed to be impossible. To solve using conventional methods. Multiple objectives that conflicted with each other, limited resources, and time constraints that forced difficult decisions. Previous military training would have focused on following established procedures and accepting inevitable casualties. Instead, Rachel's students demonstrated the kind of adaptive thinking that she had been developing throughout her career. They questioned assumptions, improvised solutions, and supported each other in ways that maximized their collective capabilities rather than competing for individual recognition. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Colonel Foster said as they watched the exercise unfold on the monitoring screens, "I've been in the Army for 15 years, and I've never seen students perform at this level. They're not just following doctrine, they're creating it." Rachel smiled, remembering her own transformation from a communications specialist who was told she wasn't ready for combat to a soldier who could adapt to any situation. "That's exactly the point, Angela. We're not teaching them to be better followers. We're teaching them to be leaders who can handle anything the world throws at them." The graduation ceremony for the first class of the Urban Combat Leadership Academy was attended by senior military officials from across the Department of Defense. General Hayes, now the Army Chief of Staff, delivered the keynote address. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes began, "the soldiers graduating today represent the future of military leadership. They have been trained not just to execute missions, but to think creatively, lead adaptively, and overcome challenges that don't exist in any manual." As Rachel watched her students receive their certificates, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From that terrified young soldier in Afghanistan to the architect of a new approach to military training, she had proven that readiness for combat wasn't about fitting into predetermined categories. It was about the willingness to exceed every limitation placed upon you. Rachel Martinez had saved more than just her squad that night in Afghanistan. She had saved the idea that courage and capability could come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the soldier who seems least ready for combat is exactly the one who's most prepared to redefine what combat readiness means. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.